Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3096.
Clerk, report the title of the bill.
House Calendar Number 60, H.R. 3096, a bill to designate the building occupied by the Federal Bureau of Investigation located at 801 Fallen Lane, Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, and the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Carson, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
H.R. 3096 would designate the building occupied by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. Supervisory Special Agent Michael Resnick dedicated his years of service with the FBI to protecting our nation. He demonstrated his dedication to protecting us all from terrorism as he continued to work while fighting pancreatic cancer. Sadly, he passed away in 2011. I think that it is more than fitting to name the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center after him. I support passage of this legislation. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3096, which designates the building occupied by the FBI in Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. As a former law enforcement, Mr. Speaker, I have a special appreciation for Supervisory Agent Resnick's 20-year FBI career. His service was highlighted by his role as a senior advisor in the White House, where he had a prominent role in leading the presidential review of watch listing policies and procedures in the aftermath of the failed terrorist airplane bombing on December 25, 2009. Special Agent Resnick led the interagency review, which led to significant improvements in how the U.S. government screens and integrates intelligence on terrorist suspects. Agent Resnick was a well-respected public servant who passed away in 2011 as a result of pancreatic cancer. This designation is supported by the building owner and will stay with the building for as long as the FBI occupies this facility. The name designation of the FBI Terrorist Screening Center is in tribute to Supervisory Special Agent Resnick and his exemplary career with the FBI. Agent Resnick will be remembered for his dedication to developing the architecture of a government-wide watch listing of terrorism suspects and his tireless efforts to protect our fellow Americans from terrorism. I urge my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, to join me in supporting H.R. 3096. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve and yield back the balance of my time. I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague, and I thank the distinguished subcommittee chairman and, of course, my colleague, the distinguished ranking member of the subcommittee, for their wonderful cooperation in this important bill. And by the way, I believe we're going to be joined by Mr. Resnick's widow and daughter very soon. Our colleague, Mr. Grimm, is going to be accompanying them here to the House. This legislation, as already indicated, will rename the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center, located in the 11th District of Virginia, in honor of Supervisor Special Agent Michael Resnick, who was instrumental in the creation of this very critical component of our national security network. I'm pleased to sponsor this bill along with my fellow Virginia colleagues, Frank Wolf and Jim Moran, and Mr. Richard Hanna of New York. Like so many of the brave men and women throughout our law enforcement community, Mike Resnick was seized by the mission of public service and gave every ounce to ensure the safety of those he was sworn to protect. In his more than 20 years in the Bureau, Mike held numerous tactical and supervisory roles, but his great contributions came in the field of counterterrorism at precisely the time we needed it. Following the attacks of 9/11, Mike Resnick was instrumental in laying the foundational policies and architecture for the screening and watch list system now administered by the Interagency Terrorist Screening Center. He was later assigned to the National Security Council, where one of his last assignments was promoting timely and effective information sharing among federal, state, and local enforcement partners. As a former local government leader myself, I can tell you how vital such collaboration is to the safety of our communities. Tragically, Mike Resnick was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in May of 2010, but he continued to staff his post through the physical and emotional strain of his treatments. CIA Director John Brennan, who at the time was the Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, said Mike wanted to make sure everything was in order for those who would carry on with his work. He died February 2nd, 2011, at the age of 50. He's survived by his wife, Sarah Chamberlain, and their daughter, Jordan. It was one of my former colleagues, Amo Houghton of New York, who introduced Mike and Sarah by setting them up on a blind date. They were married here in Washington and enjoyed tennis, golf, travel, and when they could find the time, Mike played as hard as he worked. In fact, I'm told he was known to give some of our Republican colleagues a run for their money on the tennis court. He grew up in Bayside, Wisconsin, where his parents, Sheldon and Ruth, still reside. It will come as no surprise that Mike was an Eagle Scout growing up. He was a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison and DePaul University College of Law. Prior to his service with the FBI, he spent a brief period as prosecutor. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller said Mike was not motivated by recognition, but by a desire to get the job done and see those around him succeed. Though he shied away from the spotlight, renaming this building, in which he invested so much of himself, offers a fitting recognition and a lasting tribute to the memory of one of our nation's most dedicated public servants, who the President characterized as no less than an American hero. And I hope we remember that as we debate the issue of a shutdown of the federal government. Our federal government is filled with such noble public servants serving this country. Let me close by thanking again the Chairman and Ranking Member of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee and the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management. And I urge passage of this fitting tribute, this legislation, this morning. And with that, I yield back to the distinguished Ranking Member.
Gentleman from Virginia yields back. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as a former mayor for 11 years, I had the opportunity to work with some great people in law enforcement, not only in our city government, but also those in the FBI. And I know all too well the difficult job that these men and women do to keep us safe, especially Mr. Resnick, who dedicated his life in fighting terrorism. I don't believe we need to look very far to see how vitally important it is as we try to keep Americans safe from terrorism right here at home. Mr. Resnick not only loved his job, but he loved his country. And I think it is very fitting that we honor all of those unsung heroes who go to work each day never expecting to see their name in a headline or in a story, but the men and women that go to work and that we have the freedoms that we have here in America. Naming a courthouse is not a small thing. Naming a building is not a small thing as well. But just a dedication of a good American that did all he could, even during illness, even during a time when most would quit and stop. He continued to work because of his love for his family and his country. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back his time, all time having been yielded.